The Israeli army says it has expanded its ground offensive into every part of the Gaza Strip. Heavy bombing has been reported in the southern city of Khan Yunis following orders by Israeli forces for Palestinians to leave the area. Israel says its new ground operation is needed to destroy Hamas, which is classified by several countries as a terrorist organization. Palestinians in the sealed-off territory say they're running out of places to go.
Outside this hospital in Gaza City, more and more bodies are lined up. There's no room inside, it's full with the wounded. As the focus of Israeli bombardments turns to the crowded south of the Strip, people say they have nowhere left to go. The territory is sealed off. Death is everywhere. Where should we turn? Survivors of strikes report evacuation orders coming too late before the bombs hit and say that it's homes, businesses and civilians that are being targeted.
We came here in the street and saw martyrs, wounded, here and there. We don't know why. We don't know for what reason. It's an ordinary mill. Why do they strike an olive mill?
But Israel maintains that it does not target civilians and claims it's hitting Hamas locations, now expanding its ground operation into the south as well.
The Israeli Defense Forces continue to extend their ground operation against Hamas in all of the Gaza Strip. In all of Gaza, where there is a Hamas center, the IDF is operating, fighting face-to-face with terrorists and killing them.
The Israeli goal of eliminating Hamas apparently stretches far beyond Gaza. In audio obtained by Israel's public broadcaster, the head of the Internal Security Service, Shin Bet, vowed to eliminate Hamas leaders overseas too.
The cabinet set a goal for us to eliminate Hamas, and we are determined to do that. In every place, in Gaza, Judea, Samaria, Lebanon, in Turkey, in Qatar, everywhere. It will take several years, but we will be there to do it.
As the war heads into its third month, there's little hope that the fighting will end anytime soon. Israel's closest ally, the US, has called for limiting harm to Palestinian civilians. But on the ground in Gaza, there is no sign of respite from the constant attacks.
Well, for more, let's bring in Shayna Lowe from the Norwegian Refugee Council. She joins us from Jerusalem. Shayna, what can you tell us about the current humanitarian situation in Gaza?
The humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate day by day. Now, already we've seen about 80% of Palestinians internally displaced within Gaza, more than 60% of housing damaged or destroyed. Now we have a second wave or an additional wave of displacement causing chaos, panic. Shelters are already overcrowded. On top of that, the ongoing hostilities are greatly limiting the ability of humanitarian organizations like the Norwegian Refugee Council from reaching those who need assistance most. We desperately need a ceasefire in order to address the incredible, unbelievable humanitarian needs that have grown over the last 8 weeks.
Well, people in Gaza are now being told to flee from parts of the south, but is there a safe place for civilians in Gaza at the moment, Shayna?
There hasn't been a safe place in Gaza in the last 8 weeks. We are continually perplexed by these directives for Palestinians to flee certain areas of the Gaza Strip to so-called safer areas. There are no safe places for people. The shelters are overcrowded. People are still being targeted in areas that are supposedly safe. We ourselves had staff who lost family members after they had fled the north to the south, who were then bombed in the south. This is a pattern that we've seen over and over again, where people who have already fled one place to where they were told to go are being killed in the places that are supposed to be safer. The only way to establish safe places in Gaza is to have a ceasefire and end the hostilities.
Now, the widening offensive will certainly complicate aid deliveries to Gaza. How much aid is actually getting through now?
Well, the UN hasn't been able to even release the numbers of trucks that went through yesterday. There were some trucks, but it's unclear how many went through. The other challenge is that even aid that has made it through, that has been pre-positioned, it might not be possible for humanitarian organizations to access that aid. We ourselves have been cut off from the middle area, which is where 3 truckloads worth of goods were in a warehouse awaiting distribution. Each day, we are having to reassess what is and isn't possible and adjust our plans and pivot. It's incredibly difficult to have a humanitarian response that reaches people in need when there are ongoing hostilities and also when there's such limited amounts of aid getting in.
What's it like, Shana, for you and particularly your colleagues on the ground in Gaza trying to provide help under these circumstances?
You know, for our colleagues in Gaza, not only are they trying to provide help, but they're also the ones now needing help, and we're trying to keep their families safe and provide for their families. Every day is the worst day of their lives. Every day it gets more and more challenging. I personally have run out of things to say to reassure my colleagues in Gaza because the situation day by day just looks bleaker and bleaker, not only for them on the inside, but for them on the outside. Each day, it's just a struggle to find basic needs, hours of waiting in line to get bread, difficulty finding clean water, and watching people. It's incredibly difficult to be working for a humanitarian organization, seeing so much suffering and feeling completely helpless in being able to provide any type of assistance. We are struggling, and our staff are struggling, just as the 2.3 million Palestinians trapped inside Gaza are struggling.
What do people in Gaza need most right now, Shana?
What they need most is a ceasefire. They need an end to this violence, and so that then we can bring in and scale up the amount of assistance going in, help people with the recovery, and help them to clear the rubble and help them to rebuild their lives. Of course, people are desperate for everything: food, water, medicines, medical supplies, fuel, cooking gas, all of the things that they've been needing for the last 8 weeks. But the best way to provide for the people of Gaza is to have a ceasefire so that humanitarian organizations can go in and safely provide the assistance that people so desperately need.
Shana, thank you very much as always. That was Shana Lowe from the Norwegian Refugee Council. And we can now talk to Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner. He joins us from Tel Aviv. He's a spokesperson for the Israeli military. Thanks for being with us again. Now, your forces, Colonel Lerner, are expanding their operations in southern Gaza. Should we expect the offensive in the south to unfold much as the way the offensive in the north did, with similar impact?
Terry, good morning. Indeed, from our perspective, we are continuing our offensive against Hamas terrorists, wherever they are hiding, and engaging them from the sky, from the ground, and from sea. Hamas has decided in their strategic decision not to release the hostages, these 17 women and children that are still being held by them, that we will resume the offensive. This is precisely the stipulation of the agreement of the framework that stipulated the cessation of hostilities will maintain as long as they hand over hostages. We still have 137 hostages, and that is why, because they decided to break down and step away from that agreement, we have been instructed by the government to resume our offensive in order to bring back the hostages and make sure that Hamas never has the power of government again. So I would say, without going into specifics of where we are, how we're operating, what specific locations we are going to operate in, I would say definitely we are taking the fight to Hamas.
So, again, I'm just wondering what we can expect to happen there in the south, because this is a new phase in the war. We had a cessation of hostilities for a few days as those hostages were released. What can we expect in the south, and what's happening still in the north? Are you still facing resistance there?
The combat is continuous. We've not seen any real difference in the north as over the last few days. This is now day 3 since we've resumed our offensive. We have struck and killed 2 battalion commanders, one from Sajaiya, one from Shati. Over the last 2 days, we are undermining their operational capabilities and killing their fighters on the ground every single day. This is what we continue to do. Regarding specific precision strikes that we're conducting in locations in the south, they are intelligence-based. I would say because it's not boots on the ground in the south at this stage, they are very focused on distinguishing between the civilians and the terrorists, the non-combatants to the terrorists, and that is the current situation we are still this morning. As the operation develops, indeed, we have the freedom and the obligation to remove Hamas from governing the Gaza Strip. We have the responsibility to make sure that they don't have terrorist capabilities ever to attack Israel again.
I want to ask you about civilian casualties in Gaza. It's a sensitive subject. It's estimated that around 15,000 civilians have been killed there since Israel began its operations in response to those horrific attacks by Hamas on Israel on October 7th. Are you expecting, Colonel Lana, a similar level of civilian casualties in this next phase of the war?
Terry, every civilian life lost in this war is a human tragedy and a collective tragedy. It's an individual tragedy, and it's a tragedy that could have been averted. It could have been averted by Hamas not launching their war against Israel. But once they did, they determined also where the battleground is, and that poses extreme challenges for any professional military. We are going to continue to operate within the laws of armed conflict in order to mitigate, limit the civilian strife, and limit civilian casualties. It is a war nevertheless, and all of the efforts that we go in order to limit those casualties, limit those fatalities are a huge challenge, especially in light of the fact that Hamas have intentionally placed their command and control positions in hospitals, intentionally positioned their rocket launchers in schools, intentionally positioned their tunnel underneath houses and mosques and all of the civilian infrastructure. So indeed, we will continue to go out of our way in order to evacuate people from harm's way, under the understanding that Hamas is interested in maintaining those images, maintaining the civilian casualties. This is the tragedy of this war.
Talk to us a little more about those evacuations, because we've been hearing for quite a while now that there's really no safe place to go in Gaza. I just spoke to an aid worker who told me that people are being killed in places that they were told were going to be safe. Where do you expect Gazans to go now to escape the fighting and survive it?
So we have an elaborate system of designating specific neighborhoods, specific locations where we are intending and operating, and indeed we are announcing to those locations, specific locations where people should move from, and where they will be safer. And indeed, that is the reality. That is the vast, I would say, the extensive reality on the ground, that hundreds and perhaps thousands of people are evacuating from specific places and reaching safety in the area. Indeed, it doesn't undermine the fact that Hamas will continue to abuse civilian locations elsewhere, continue to launch rockets, continue to conduct attacks, continue to hide and plan their activities from within the civilian arena, putting more people at risk. This is the challenge that we face. You can't expect us not to defend our people because they are hiding behind Palestinians.
Israeli military spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, thank you very much.
Good day.
Journalist Hazem Balusha used to report from Gaza. He now joins us from Jordan. Hazem, what are you hearing about the situation in Gaza right now?
According to the people on the ground and from the reports from different sources that some people described last night, that was like as the war started over again, there was huge bombardments and airstrikes across the Gaza Strip from the north area and from the south. Many people said that they heard some tanks are entering some areas like Sheikh Radwan in Gaza City. The new thing that the tanks are trying to cross from the eastern part of the south to the west, trying to cut Gaza Strip, Khan Yunis from other parties.
Now, people in Gaza have been told to evacuate areas that are being targeted by the Israeli military. Where are they supposed to go, Hazem?
This is always the question is asked, and by everybody, by the people. They have no place. I know people who got displaced from 5 or 6 times. Some people are more. Some from the north displaced to Gaza City, then to the south, then to another place in the south. Now they are asked to move somewhere else. I'm talking to people and they are asking, and if you look at the social media, people are sharing and asking about places to go. People in Rafah, for example, yesterday I saw plenty of posts asking people where to go. They are literally in the street. They have no place to go, as the people ask from Khan Yunis to leave the area as the ground invasion is expected to invade the area.
Now, Israel says it will continue its offensive in Gaza until the threat from Hamas has been eliminated. What are Gazans expecting to happen there in the coming days and weeks, Hazem?
The expectation is the worst. It's getting worse from day to another, from a moment to another. The death toll is increasing. Destruction is widening. People losing hope. I can see that in their words when I talk to them, when I read their messages. It's very hard for them. They have no hope of anything would happen or change. Of course, they are willing to see the war is over, but the reality on the ground that they have no signs of anything would improve, especially with the increase in the south now. Is like the tanks is improving and getting new areas, especially amid of the lack of food, lack of water and electricity, communication, and people are not able to shelter, and they are moving from a place to another.
Hazem, thank you very much. That was journalist Hazem Balusha in Amman, Jordan.
Thank you.
We can now cross to our correspondent, Rebecca Ritters, who's standing by in Jerusalem. Rebecca, Israel is coming under increasing pressure to avoid civilian casualties. Is it showing any sign of changing its tactics in Gaza due to the international pressure?
Terry, not at all. In fact, quite to the contrary. We've heard from both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the heads of the military that they will push on in the next phase, as they call it, of their ground operation, that they will press on in the same fashion. Yesterday, we heard the head of the Israeli military saying that this would be no less powerful, the operation in the south, and no less successful. We heard that on Thursday, Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, did speak to heads of the Israeli government and the Israeli military, leaders here, urging them that what we saw in the north couldn't be repeated in the south. We heard Kamala Harris, the vice president of the US, saying in Doha that the civilian casualties were just too high. So we are seeing that pressure, but we're really seeing the exact opposite coming from Israel. They are vowing to push on and to continue. They maintain that they give sufficient warnings to civilians to be able to get out of the areas that they're bombarding. We had confirmation yesterday, of course, as you've been reporting, that they have now moved into the south and in all areas and have, from all accounts that we're getting, have carved up much of the area into what's being called a macabre board game, if you will, numbered areas in the strip that citizens can then look up up and see whether their area that they're in is going to be attacked. So I think it's unlikely that we'll see any let-up from the Israelis, and we're very, very likely, in fact, to see a similar level of destruction and civilian casualties.
Now, Hamas is still holding hostages in Gaza. Is there any indication, Rebecca, that Israel and Hamas might return to the negotiating table to talk about another hostage release, another pause in the fighting?
It's always really difficult to say, Terry. The talks are always kept very much under wraps. But, you know, there is intention from the negotiators. We have seen the US, Qatar and Egypt pushing for the resumption of these talks. They were ongoing even after the limited ceasefire broke down on Friday. They were continuing. But on Saturday, they did come to a complete halt when Israel pulled out its negotiators from Doha, where they had been there trying to discuss the resumption. They blamed Hamas for not sticking to their promise of providing a list of further women and children to be released in the hostage exchange. But, you know, it is, of course, likely that they could rejoin talks down the track. We know that they're under immense pressure. It's Israel, from the families, from the relatives of the hostages and from other, you know, from the whole nation, really, to make sure that these hostages are returned to Israel. But at this stage, those talks still stalled.
Rebecca, thank you very much. Our correspondent Rebecca Ritters there in Jerusalem.
As Israel expands its ground offensive to all of Gaza, I asked military analyst Marina Miron if the Israeli military was picking up where it left off after the week-long pause in fighting, or if this signals a change in strategy.
Well, I think that they had to readjust the strategy. Nobody knew how long the ceasefire will last, if it will last. We have seen that it has worked out for 7 days, but now a lot of things could have happened during this time, and Hamas might have moved its weapons, might have moved the hostages, the remaining hostages. So obviously, Israeli intelligence would have had to be very active during this time in order to be able to assess the situation on the ground and to provide this information to the troops in order to be able to conduct its operation further. So it seemed that Israel has started in the north. Now they want to start in the south. So they will be more concentrating on the south and then bringing those two closer together, presumably. We don't know. It will depend on how the military operation evolves.
Right. And we're looking at something like 10,000 Palestinians dead. We're using estimates from the Hamas-controlled health authority in Gaza. But the US has led a growing chorus of disquiet at those civilian deaths. Why do you think Israel has not changed its strategy despite those warnings?
It is very difficult to adjust the strategy, especially if you're fighting an irregular force, and then the irregular force is Hamas. So according to the international law, both sides would have to take all feasible precautions in order to get the civilians out. This is unfortunately not the case, and this is where normal people who have nothing to do with this conflict suffer as a potential collateral damage. But we don't know all the facts. We do not know why Israel is choosing the locations that is choosing to strike. And we see a lot of those locations are civilian locations. So these assessments will have to be made post-mortem, so to say. And I think the reason why Israel doesn't want to change its strategy is because it would be a military disadvantage for Israel. So Israel could be much slower, much more discriminate perhaps, but that would allow more time for Hamas to move around, and then Israel wouldn't be able to use its entire might to strike Hamas targets. So there is this trade-off, and I think right now Israel is not ready to make that step, despite the fact that for Hamas this is very beneficial, because groups like that want a disproportionate response in order to be able to film it and then to put it out and conduct psychological operations in terms of showing how barbaric the other side is.
Right, clear as ever. Thank you so much for joining us again on this Sunday, Marina. Military analyst Marina Miron.